China is fighting the biggest Delta variant outbreak so far, but drastic measures to prevent further outbreaks are sparking complaints. Beijing launches a new stock exchange. Experts say it could present a new way for the Chinese regime to strengthen its financial control and avoid foreign market rules. As the U.S. and China compete for microchip leadership, some American firms are boosting Beijing's chip ambitions. A Chinese dissident shares his life-threatening story of how he managed to skirt death threats from China. And will Australia step up to defend Taiwan in the case of a Chinese invasion? One of the nation's top leaders says yes, as long as the U.S. does too. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. First, we looked at the state of the pandemic in China. The country is fighting the biggest outbreak of the Delta variant so far. Authorities in several cities are taking drastic measures to prevent further outbreaks, causing complaints among citizens. The northeastern city of Dalian is the latest hotspot. Authorities report over 200 new cases from the city, which has a population of 7.4 million. About a third of the cases are from a local university town. Now, over 10,000 students are locked in their dorms and taking online courses. While hundreds of students were transferred to hotels for quarantine and observation. It's not just the colleges. Many neighborhoods in the city sealed off people's apartment doors as a virus control measure. But some residents can't take it anymore. A Chinese media video shows a local female citizen trying to jump off her apartment building from the second floor, causing neighbors from across the street to cry out in shock. But in the footage, it seems she eventually gave up. In Xinji City, a county-level city 3 hours drive south of Beijing, online video shows that authorities are using iron wires to seal off doors of residents' homes from the outside. That plus attaching a paper tape to the door. Then, when residents open the door, the paper will tear and the authorities will know when they come to check. And those residents will be in trouble. The country's capital, Beijing, has not been spared in this new outbreak. That's as the city prepares for the Winter Olympics this coming February. After reporting 7 cases, Beijing will, on Wednesday, start requiring all people arriving from other parts of the country to show a negative test result before they are allowed to enter the city. Meanwhile, China's biggest oil firm based in Beijing is in a state of emergency after 4 staff members were found to have tested positive. The firm reported in a meeting last week that over 100 of its staff had contact with confirmed patients because they attended a meeting together. A compound building of the firm is sealed off. The building is adjacent to the venue for the Beijing Olympics. In China's western Ningxia region, an apartment compound has been sealed off for almost a month. Online video shows residents shouting, "We want to get out." That's as soldiers were sent in to patrol the compound and maintain control of the quarantine. A new stock exchange kicked off on Monday in Beijing. Located in the country's political center, it's being seen as a move to increase the Chinese Communist Party's economic control. The new stock market was set up to help small and medium-sized businesses raise capital. More than 80 companies traded on the exchange's opening day, all of them from China. 10 of those came as initial public offerings known as IPOs, which surged throughout the day and closed with an average price increase of 200%. And at the top of the success list is an auto parts maker with a whopping 500% rise. The new market is now China's 3rd stock exchange and the only one in the northern part of the country. The other 2 are located in Shanghai and Shenzhen. The new exchange's location also poses strategic significance for Communist Party head Xi Jinping and his ambitions for the country. U.S.-based China expert Mei Fengjie told Radio Free Asia that the Beijing Stock Exchange may intensify political control in the capital market. That's because the communist regime has hinted at concerns that the economy in the south is stronger than in the north, where Beijing is located. The expert added that more political and economic resources will likely be moving toward Beijing in the future. The timing of the market's launch may also offer clues about the move. It comes at a time when Beijing has been clamping down on some of China's biggest tech giants, aiming to ensure the nation's wealth isn't concentrated in the hands of a few industry tycoons. The Beijing Stock Exchange excludes large-scale companies and is supposed to create a funding platform for innovative small business. That's based on what Xi Jinping said back in September. Milton Israti, chief economist of financial company Vested, believes this attempt to foster smaller companies is to help China's economy without depending on foreign money.
If you depend on foreign money, of course, you have to abide by foreign rules, things like disclosure and transparency, which the Chinese government does not like.
He added that foreign investors will want to get it, but it'll depend on what kind of restrictions Beijing places on them. Privately owned small and medium-sized companies are often seen as second-class businesses in China compared to major state-owned companies. They frequently face difficulties in getting loans from state-owned banks. America and China are racing for the top spot in microchip advancement, but a report says some American companies are helping Beijing's efforts to dominate the industry. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
While China and the U.S. are competing for tech leadership, some American firms are pouring money into Chinese microchip or semiconductor makers. That's according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. Before we dive into the details, here's an important piece of background. Experts say semiconductors are at the heart of the U.S.-China race. That's because they run nearly every aspect of our modern life, powering things like phones, laptops, and cars. Chips also underpin other areas that U.S. and China are competing for, like artificial intelligence and cyberspace. And as Washington works to preserve its lead in chip technology, American firms have raised billions of dollars for Chinese chip companies. A Wall Street Journal report says between 2017 and 2020, U.S. investment firms made almost 60 deals in China's chip industry. That's more than twice that of 4 years ago. Among those U.S. investors is American chip giant Intel. The company is currently backing a Chinese chip maker called Primaries Technologies. Intel says its China deals are less than 10% of its total global investments. Other investors are the China affiliates of some Silicon Valley venture firms, like Sequoia Capital and Walden International. Among those, Walden International is a major investor and closed over 40% of those deals mentioned above. Currently, the U.S. has the upper hand in the microchip race. Chips are one of America's top exports, while China is the world's largest chip importer. But Beijing is set on catching up, investing hundreds of billions of dollars to prop up its domestic industry. It aims to become the leader in all parts of the industry by 2030. Juliet Song, NTD News.
New comments from the Biden administration could mean changes coming for U.S. tariffs on China. The U.S. is willing to consider reducing some tariffs on Chinese goods. That's according to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Her remarks came just ahead of the upcoming U.S.-China talks. President Biden was set to meet virtually with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping on Monday. Asked whether tariffs on Chinese goods could stay in place, Yellen called the question certainly something that's under consideration. She added that U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai is reviewing the Phase 1 trade deal. Tai said earlier that she would start approving requests to reduce tariffs on certain Chinese imports. The Trump administration slapped tariffs on China starting in 2018. The former president said Beijing's unfair trade practices hurt the U.S. and called tariffs a way to pressure China into buying more U.S. goods. Beijing, as well as some U.S. business groups, have urged the Biden administration to drop the Trump-era tariffs. United Nations climate talks ended over the weekend with a deal targeting fossil fuels. And though it is the first agreement of its kind, a Beijing-backed last-minute drama watered down the wording.
Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
After 2 weeks of torturous negotiations, a deal in Glasgow that many at the talks are calling imperfect progress. The UN Climate Summit in Scotland ended with a global agreement that aimed at least to keep alive hopes of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius But a last-minute objection from India, whose energy needs are hugely dependent on the coal it has in abundance, ended up watering down the first-of-its-kind call for a reduction in fossil fuels. The agreement was hurriedly amended to accelerating, quote, efforts to phase down instead of phase out unabated coal power.
But we are disappointed.
The change was met with dismay by the rich economies of the European Union and Switzerland, as well as the Marshall Islands, one of the small Pacific island states whose existence is under threat from rising sea levels. But all said they would let it stand for the sake of an overall agreement.
We accept this change with the greatest reluctance. We do so only, and I really want to stress, only, because there are critical elements of this package that people in my country need as a lifeline for their future.
Alok Sharma, the conference chairman, apologized after he heard vulnerable nations express their anger over the last-minute changes.
I also understand the deep disappointment. But I think, as you have noted, it's also vital that we protect this package.
The agreement, in effect, acknowledged that commitments made so far to cut emissions of planet-heating greenhouse gases are nowhere near enough, and asked nations to set tougher climate pledges next year rather than every 5 years, as they are currently required to do.
The last-minute drama from India was backed by China and other coal-dependent developing nations. After a huddle between the envoys from China, India, the United States, and the European Union, the working of the agreement was changed. The Chinese Communist Party plotting murder on American soil. A dissident finally fled China to the U.S., but even after his escape, he was still not safe.
The threat of the Chinese Communist Party follows dissidents more intensively, even outside China. Jie Lijian fled to the U.S. last year. His mother died from persecution at the hands of the regime. He has been protesting with his father from a very young age. He never stopped speaking out against China's judicial injustices and the persecution of petitioners there. To punish him, the local authorities of the CCP put his father under house arrest. He himself also suffers from the threat of the regime and even became ensnared in a plot to take his life. Jie sat down with NTD to tell the story of how CCP agents threatened him.
He told me on Telegram, saying, I know where you live. Be cautious later, whatever you do. See the surroundings. Familiar, right? He sent me a distant photo of me, from behind, walking in the neighborhood after dinner.
Jie also received a picture of a knife. The CCP agent sent it to him together with verbal threats, saying they should have broken his leg 2 days ago. The threat reminded Jie of an accident he had had on that day.
At that time, I was riding on my bike on the road near my home. I was riding downhill, and a car rushed over, accelerating. My instinct told me this car was targeting me, and I dodged to the right. He was too fast, accelerating too hard. I was thrown straight off the bike. The bike then fell to the ground. I was injured, and my phone was broken.
He said he reported the incident to the FBI and says he is not intimidated because he believes that he and many other dissidents are doing the right thing. He says the CCP uses despicable means to obstruct the pro-democracy movement, and he predicts the regime will fall soon, like what happened to the Soviet Union.
New comments from Australia seem to spell good news for Taiwan. Australian Defense Minister Peter Dutton said on Saturday that if the U.S. takes action to safeguard Taiwan, it would be inconceivable for Australia not to join in. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said last week that if Beijing used force to change the status quo with Taiwan, the U.S. and its allies would take unspecified action. In an interview with newspaper The Australian, Dutton said, quote, it would be inconceivable that we wouldn't support the U.S. in an action if the U.S. chose to take that action. Taiwan welcomes its ally from Latin America. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen met with the Honduran president at her office on Saturday. Tsai called President Juan Orlando Hernandez's visit significant.
This is the first presidential delegation visiting Taiwan from our Latin American diplomatic allies since the beginning of the pandemic.
She says she hopes the two countries will continue to help each other on the international stage. Hernandez and his wife started a 3-day visit to Taiwan on Friday. Their visit is part of a celebration of 80 years of diplomatic relations between Taiwan and Honduras. The country is one of Taiwan's 15 diplomatic allies. Hernandez is due to leave office in January. He has become increasingly isolated over U.S. allegations of ties to drug trafficking. In March this year, U.S. authorities sentenced Hernandez's brother to life in prison for drug trafficking. Beijing uses dollar diplomacy to seek support from other countries, offering aid in return for isolating Taiwan. China's efforts to win over Taiwan's remaining allies alarms Washington, which has been especially concerned about Beijing's growing influence in Central America and the Caribbean. The impact of the scandal between a top Chinese tennis player and a former Chinese high-ranking official has reached a new level. The head of the Women's Tennis Association is speaking out. The organization is calling for an investigation into a sexual assault allegation made by a Chinese tennis star. The star, Peng Shuai, accused a former vice premier of sexual assault. Peng Shuai won the world's #1 tennis doubles in 2014. The Women's Tennis Association, or WTA, organizes women's professional tennis competitions. It has more than 1,500 players from over 80 nations. The head of the WTA said in a statement that the allegations must be investigated fully, fairly, transparently, and without censorship. China was quick to censor Peng after she made the allegations via social media. The post was taken down within half an hour, and her whereabouts is unknown. Simon told the New York Times that several sources say Peng is safe and not under any physical threat, but no one in the WTA could reach her so far. As for the association, calling for an investigation like this could risk their business in China. The sports organization has 11 tournaments there. Simon told the outlet if at the end of the day we don't see the appropriate results from this, we would be prepared to take that step and not operate our business in China if that's what it came to. And the governing body of men's tennis is backing the WTA's call. In a statement, the chairman of the organization said they are deeply concerned for Peng Shuai's safety and that they stand in full support of the WTA's call for a full investigation into the allegations. Is freedom of expression above a law in a totalitarian regime? A senior Hong Kong cultural official says no. He made the statement last Thursday on the eve of a major contemporary art museum's opening.
The opening of a contemporary art museum intended to match the likes of London's Tate Modern and New York's Museum of Modern Art has caused tension between Hong Kong cultural officials and artists amid censorship fears stemming from a China-imposed national security law. The multi-billion-dollar M+ features contemporary work from leading Chinese, Asian and Western artists, including paintings, ceramics, videos and installations from the likes of China's Zhao Xiaogang and Britain's Anthony Gormley. But the imposition of a sweeping national security law by China last year on its once freest city is casting a pall over the museum's opening as curators and artists struggle to find a balance between artistic expression and political censorship. Earlier this year, pro-Beijing politicians and media outlets criticised certain works in the M+ for breaching the national security law and inciting hatred against China. One of the works being a photograph by Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei giving the middle finger in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Henry Tang is the head of the West Kowloon Cultural District, a new cultural hub that includes the M+. Tang stressed all exhibits must comply with the national security law and that certain works in their collection, including Ai's contested photograph, wouldn't be displayed.
In the past, there were some controversy regarding whether some exhibits might be in violation of law. So therefore, I want to emphasize that point first. In order to lay the foundation that the opening of M+ does not mean artistic expression is above the law. It is not.
Weiwei himself is critical of the implications on artistic expression these blurred lines may cause.
The situation now completely changed. Under the national security law, the museum is under clearly under censorship. When you have a museum which cannot or incapable to defend its own integrity about freedom of speech, then that raises a question. And certainly the museum cannot perform well in terms of contemporary culture, because the very important character of contemporary art is in questioning the authority.
2 pieces of art from Ai Weiwei are displayed in the museum, but his more controversial works are not. Art is all about freedom of expression, but when it's focused on the Chinese Communist Party, that freedom can be hard to come by. It's a lesson one Chinese dissident knows all too well. And now Beijing's apparent disdain is following him to Italy. But local officials are having none of it. Let's take a look. Ben Wedeman has the story.
You know, it's not just
China is seen red over an exhibit in the northern Italian city of Brescia, hosting the Chinese-Australian artist known as Badiu Cao.
It's almost impossible that you can avoid offending the Chinese government these days. Anything could be sensitive, anything could be problematic.
So sensitive that the Chinese embassy in Rome recently requested that the mayor of Brescia cancel the exhibit scheduled to open Friday. I have to say I had to read the letter twice because it surprised me, says Deputy Brescia Mayor Laura Castelletti. It was an intrusion on a city's artistic, cultural decision. CNN's repeated requests to the Chinese embassy for clarification went unanswered. Badiu Cao moved to Australia in 2009. His art an uncompromising critique of the Chinese Communist Party. 3 years ago, a show he was scheduled to hold in Hong Kong was cancelled after he tweeted his family was threatened by China. The exhibit in Brescia, however, is going ahead.
It was a matter of artistic freedom of expression.
Badiu Cao has teamed up with Anis Kanter of the Boston Celtics, painting shoes for Kanter with messages championing the cause of oppressed minorities in China. Kanter himself is an outspoken critic of China's alleged abuse of its Uyghur Turkic Muslim minority.
Heartless dictator of China, Xi Jinping, and the Communist Party of China, I'm calling you out right now in front of the whole world. Close down the slave labor camps and free the Uyghur people. Stop the genocide now.
Words like that and art like this strike a raw nerve in China, which denies claims of genocide and mass incarceration. Increasingly, angering China is also a raw nerve for multinational corporations.
They're so into the money and market in China that they wasn't risking that.
Badiu Cao says he's regularly harassed online and occasionally threatened by those who object to his work. His art war by other means against a system that has grown ever more powerful in recent years.
So it's like a battleground. And that's how you can use visual language or use internet meme to kind of dissolve the authority of censorship.
Who's winning the battle at the moment?
I think it's a long fight. It is too early to tell who will win.
That this exhibit is happening, a small win, perhaps.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.